Towards the end of the 19th century, in 60 acres of Essex farmland, one man built his dream, a refuge for destitute girls. 100 years later, the children have gone, but the girls' village remains. Dave Ryle, the village gardener for over 30 years, still tends the grave of its founder.
This is where Dr. Barnardo's buried under here. This is the monument here for Dr. Barnardo. It's always kept tidy and clean because this is the governor, what we call the governor here.
Stepney, East London, a funeral procession worthy of a king. When he died in 1905, the name of Thomas Barnardo was known throughout the land. This film, made of his funeral, became the first in a large archive owned by the charity that bears his name. During his lifetime, he helped more than 60,000 destitute children, and Dr. Barnardo's homes became known as the largest family in the world.
In Barnardo's, you see, the one thing they did teach you was that you was never alone. You was a member of the Barnardo family, and every Barnardo boy was your brother. It doesn't belittle your own family, it makes your own family more special.
I was never ashamed of being a Barnardo girl, because Barnardo's had a very good name indeed. I don't know what the name's like now, but it was when I was a youngster.
I wish that Marjorie and I had mum and dad that we could look up to and be happy, but we didn't.
There was nobody to cuddle us, and I think that most Barnardo children that you talk to say, if only somebody had kissed me or loved me a little bit. But there was no question of cuddling us, not even if you were ill.
In 1867, Thomas Barnardo set up his first boys' home here in Stepney Causeway. By the 1920s, the home had become one of the many reception centres for the vast Barnardo's organisation, which was looking after 8,000 children in homes throughout the land. The sign outside still read, "No destitute child ever refused admission."
I went to Barnardo's early December 1926. I can remember going there, but I don't know why I was sent there in the first place. I arrived in a tram, and I think I was covered over with a sack, if I remember rightly.
Every child who came into Dr. Barnardo's was photographed and allocated a number. The reason for their admission was recorded, but kept secret. Only those old enough retained a memory of their family.
We were a family of, or had been, 13 children. When our mother died, in 1937, there were 10 of us alive, and the last one died either with or shortly after her. Quite what happened we don't know, but the 4 of us were taken to Stepney Causeway and put in the care of Dr. Barnardo's.
When Reg and Frank's mother died, their father had to make a painful decision. Unable to bring up 10 children by himself, he chose to put the youngest 4 in Barnardo's.
Everybody was crying around us. I think Dad was with us, I'm not quite certain. What I know is that everybody was in a awful state, and I kept being sick in this plastic crepe bag they kept sticking in front of me. I remember going up a metal staircase and coming out onto a balcony. Down below was this courtyard, and it seemed to me there were literally millions of kids of all ages swarming around. And I've seen pictures of Dickensian kids, girls in long dresses, lucid dresses, and it sticks in my mind. That's what it looked like. But the rest of the day I can't remember much about at all, except being screaming when Dad left us.
Mum was a dancer, and then of course when I came along, she couldn't any longer continue that because she had to look after me, and eventually it got too much for her and she decided to put me into Barnardo's. It was suggested by the welfare officer, and one morning this lovely lady come along, "Come on Phyllis," and I was away. And I can see my mum's face now. She looked out the window watching me.
At one stage we were told that her mother went off and left us, and that he was in the army, in the war. We were told that, but we were never told as to why our mother left us, or where she left us, and who found us, or anything. I mean, we wouldn't know that, would we? Some kind person had probably found us. I just don't know. But I feel like this: she couldn't have abandoned us exactly, because otherwise, how did we get into Barnardo's? It's a thing that I'll never know. Where we were only grateful that somebody took us in, well, I am anyway, and that I'm alive today. I dread to think what might have happened to us.
Only a few of the children admitted were genuine orphans. Most were there because their parents were unable or unwilling to look after them, due to poverty or ill health, or because the child was illegitimate. In order to give the children the chance of a fresh start in life, they weren't told about their natural families. They were a member of the Barnardo family now. The vast size of the institution made it almost impossible for the children to be treated as individuals. They had to fit into the Barnardo way of doing things, and every aspect of their lives was strictly regulated from the moment they were admitted.
When I got there, first thing they took all my clothes, washed me and everything else, and then took me into what was like a playroom, I suppose, where there was other children. And I said, "How long have I got to stop?" And they said, "Until we make our minds up what we're going to do with you."
For a child recently separated from its family and facing a life alone, the process of admission could be traumatic or, at best, disorientating.
I can't remember that I was ever scared, but I suppose more curious than scared as to what was going to happen to me.
Every child was given a thorough examination to determine whether they needed special treatment or to be put in quarantine before being released into the homes.
I had a medical, and I was taken from one room to the other, and I had no clothes on, and they gave me a sweet, which was a clove sweet, and I just threw it away because I have never liked clove sweets. And I was there over the Christmas period, and Christmas Day I was sitting at the table, and I was told that there was no Christmas dinner for me. And I just sat, and the tears trickled down my face.
Despite having the companionship of her twin sister Marjorie, Mabel Johnson found the experience equally distressing.
We were both of us very, very frightened, and we sort of didn't know when to say yes and when to say no to sort of things like that. I think that the bottom of it, we were just very frightened. Well, we just wondered what was happening to us, I think. Yes.
Most new arrivals were kept at the Stepney Causeway Reception Centre until a decision was made about their future.
I don't know how long we were there. It couldn't have been very long. Because, I mean, Eileen and Jean were only babies. Jean was just turned 1 and Eileen was 2. And we got up one morning and I was playing in the nursery, whatever they call it. And I had one of these kiddies' forts, you know, the old forts with the lead soldiers. And they used to sort of put all the children together. And for some reason or other, Eileen and Jean weren't there. So I said, you know, where's my sisters? And the reply I got was, they've gone. I said, what do you mean they've gone? And they said they've gone to Baby's Castle. And I can remember literally exploding. And I picked up this fort and I threw it straight at the nurse. I don't know if I hit her or not. The next thing I remember, about 6 people seemed to pounce on me and I was screaming and kicking and probably swearing at the bargain. I was 5 years older. And they dragged me and stuck me in this room and they locked the door. I don't know how long they left me in there, but never forgotten it. Never forgotten it. I can see it happening now. And it's had a peculiar effect because if I see a little boy in a tantrum, it upsets me.
In Barnardo's, family ties were considered less important than the physical well-being of the child. Everything was done according to the organization's own rules and regulations. Girls were always separated from boys, and babies from older children. Babies were sent to one of the specialist homes where they could be properly cared for, or they might be fostered out. As the children grew up, they would be moved on to another home for older children, and then onto a training home. Travelling matrons were employed to escort the children on each new stage of the journey through Barnardo's. By far the biggest and most spectacular of the homes was the girls' village at Barkingside in Essex. When Thomas Barnardo began building the village in 1873, it was a revolutionary alternative to the workhouse and the large orphanages of the day. For poor children from the slums, the village with its fresh air, plentiful food and clean surroundings must have been quite a shock. The children entered a self-contained world. Surrounded by a high wall, the village had its own church, nursery and infant schools, and even a well to provide fresh drinking water. The girls were divided into separate families of about 20 children, accommodated in their own cottage and looked after by a house mother. There were 68 cottages neatly arranged around 3 village greens. Members of the public were encouraged to visit the village, to see the doctor's great work, and to make a donation to it.
Oh, it was lovely when you came here. It was like coming into heaven because it was a great big place. We had a lovely library. We had a swimming pool here. We had a hospital. And we had a special cottage called Sunshine House for the crippled people. And there was another one called YHL, which stood for Young Helpers League, which most of the children that got ringworm or something like that, they used to be kept in that cottage. We had a brownie band, we had guides, we had everything. I mean, we were better off than the kids outside.
When I first saw the village, well, it was something like I'd never seen before, because it was something quite apart. There was all these cottages with it was like 20 or more children in them, with cottage mother and probably an assistant. We didn't sort of mix with the other children from other cottages, except we went to church on a Sunday, then we'd all go together and each sitting in sort of our own little group.
Our cottage mother at Ivy Cottage, every child was kissed goodnight, no matter how naughty they'd been. She never hesitated. She came up and kissed us all goodnight, tucked us in, and she used to say goodnight and see if you can be better tomorrow. I don't ever remember her laying her finger on any of us. Her punishments used to be 25 pair of shoes every night for a week, 50 on a Monday, because you had Sunday ones as well. Or she'd stop you having cake and jam and stuff. She'd have to have bread and dripping on Sunday instead of what the others were having. She never believed in hitting children. She believed that the best way is to do it materially, not physically. But she was a wonderful little lady. She wasn't much taller than me, but we loved her. She really was a lovely lady.
The cottage mothers ruled every aspect of the children's lives and could run their homes as they saw fit. Not everyone remembers them as fondly as Phyllis.
One was very much at the mercy of them, and some, fortunately, I had no harsh punishments meted out to me, but I saw it once with two children who'd told a lie, and Miss Barnes' idea was to give them a teaspoonful of dry Epsom salts. Well, one child took it, opened her mouth and took it, and the tears trickled down, but the other one could cause herself to go into a sort of fit, and she was on the floor rigid, and there was nothing that they could do about it. So she didn't get the dry Epsom salts.
It was a strict regime, and for a child the way it was enforced could be rather alarming.
The teacher was quite stern, and I suppose sometimes I was a mischievous child. And if you were naughty, you were barred in the chair, and they had a hole either side where a bar was put through, and the teacher would then come round, opening and shutting a pair of scissors and saying, and if you're naughty again, I'll cut your tongues out. And of course that was very frightening to a 5-year-old child.
Most of the children in the village had relatives living outside. Visits were permitted once every 3 months, but letters and presents could be sent in all year round.
I used to get very jealous of the other girls because they used to get parcels and things sent to them from their relations, and I never got anything. And I used to think, well, why? What did I do? I used to think I'd done something wrong. I didn't realise at the time that Mother couldn't afford to keep me, and that's why she put me there. It was for my own good.
There were 25 of us in the cottage, and practically all of the children there had a relative of some description, and they used to come in and see them. And Marjorie and I just couldn't believe it, because they were always having people and nobody ever came to see us. Well, we hadn't got anybody to come. So. Yeah.
The children were constantly reminded of their saviour, Thomas Bernardo, by the presence of his monument in the middle of the village. And once a year on Founder's Day, the anniversary of his birth, a large celebration was held in his honour.
It was a very happy day. There was dancing and singing and all out on the village green. And they had stalls all the way around. It really was a thing to see, really. And we all enjoyed ourselves very much. Marjorie and I joined in, and we were very happy, you know. Yeah.
Oh, it was quite a highlight to all of us, and there was so much going on the green, and of course Meadow Cottage wasn't far from the green, and I suppose we were able to run riot a little bit. And I remember seeing this very elderly lady with long black clothes and being told that that was Mrs. Bernardo.
Founder's Day was the most wonderful time because we always had posh people come. And one year we had Queen Mary and King George V come. And I can see her now. She had a long grey coat and she always wore what they called a toque. And this was a mauve one she had on this particular day. And they had, you know, these little stools with the 3 steps you stand on. Well, the Brownie Band came in and I was the conductress. I turned around to bow to Queen Mary and fell off it. And when she came round and inspected us, she chucked me under the chin and nearly lifted me off my feet, and she said, "That was a stupid thing to do, wasn't it, child?" I said, "Yes, ma'am," and curtsied like a good girl.
At its height, the girls' village was home for nearly 1,500 children aged between 1 and 16. Although the charity had always been proud of the village and of the boys' homes, the belief grew that any institution was an unnatural environment for a child to grow up in. And by the 1930s, almost half the Bernardo's children were fostered out, rather than living in the homes. The children were placed with working-class families in country villages, where it was believed they would be amongst their own kind and wouldn't stand out. The children had no say in the matter. An order would be issued from headquarters at Stepney that a child should be fostered, and a travelling matron would appear to escort the child to their new home, where they would meet their foster parents for the first time.
We gets off this train, we'd got a nurse travelling with us, a courier or something anyway, and there was this, seemed quite a tall woman to me, and then there was this little old lady who was dressed in black from the top to the bottom, and she got a funny old hat on, black one. And I remember turning in and saying, "Oh, blimey, I don't want to go with her. She only needs a cat and a broomstick and she'd be a witch." I could started feeling
The 2 young boys were equally suspicious of their new home, which they found surprisingly primitive.
We got into this place. And now, what you got to remember is we was used to street lightings, wash-away toilets, running water, electric light. And you gets into this house and no bulbs, no electric lights. And it was a proper country house, and it was all done in this dark green distemper, and it got this brown, well, it's more like black matchboards, and all the way around, you know. This big black stove. Big black stove and grate and that in there. I say, no electric light. I mean, went to bed with candles.
No inside toilet.
No inside toilet. It was,
no flush toilet. No flush toilet. No. And the water, well, there was a tap there, but if the next door neighbour was watering his garden, you waited for half an hour.
Despite their first impressions of their new home and their new foster mother, Reg and Frank grew fond of her.
She never, ever attempted to give us the impression she was our mother. She tried to explain in her own way that, you know, our mum had died and that she was looking after us.
She just said that, "Well, you know I love you, don't you?" So I said, "Yeah." I said, "I know you love us, but why?" I went to know why she loved us, you see. So she said, "Because you're you," she said. And she said, "Because God wants me to, and I know your mother wants me to." And that's the way you share. To me, I mean, she is my mother. She's my living mother. Or she was then.
Frank,
But she still lives on in my memory, so that's it, you know, I mean.
that woman, she had a heart of gold. She really did.
And we was her boys, weren't we? Wonderful. Wonderful.
Muriel Farley had a very different experience when she was sent to a foster home with another Barnardo girl.
We went to this family, but we were never made to feel as we belonged to the family. We were never treated as family. Our meals we had in the kitchen on our own. We didn't mix with their children. We had to get up early in the morning, and when I say early, it was about 6:30. Clean out the grate and light the fire, make sure the children's shoes were cleaned, and lay tables and all that. But then we'd have our breakfast and would be sent off to school, but we never went to school with their children. And then at night when we came home from school, the same sort of procedure'd happen. We'd have to do jobs. Never sit in the sitting room with them. Went to bed early. And then, it was the only time we really sort of had a chance, the two, because we slept the two of us in the one bed. And we were there at night, and that was really the only time we had to sort of, on our own, to be able to talk to one another. And like kids you do, you know, we'd laugh and perhaps make a little bit of noise. And if we did, he'd come up and offer to come his belt, and we'd often get a beating. Anyway, this went on for about 2 years. Needless to say, we were too terrified to say anything to anybody, though there were people came down from Stepney about every 6 months to see how we were. We were never alone with them. The family was always present, so of course naturally we couldn't tell them anything. We were much too frightened. But eventually it came to light through the school. I think it was one day, I was getting ready for PE, and I must have been taking my clothes off and pulled my vest up, and the teacher noticed wheels across my back. Wanted to know what they were. Of course, first of all, I was too scared to tell her, you see. I was afraid of what would happen to me. But eventually she made me tell her, and of course the result of that, she got on to Barnardo's, and immediately somebody came down and both of us were taken away.
Trained inspectors would make regular and unscheduled visits, calling first at the child's school to talk to the teacher, and then at the foster home to talk to the parents. It was an enlightened system for the time, but suffered from the fact that the inspectors were rarely alone with the child, and the child's opinion was almost never asked for. Their physical condition was thought to be a clear indication of how well they were being looked after.
They used to look after you very good, because you used to have an inspection, didn't you, about every month or so? We used to have to be weighed and all that.
The way, well, there were about 7 or 8 of us in the school at the time, and they used to get all the Barnardo kids in the classroom, and then this nurse used to come round and inspect you, check your teeth and check your hair and check your fingernails, and then weigh you, and she had this blessed net. She used to hang it on the door, sit you in this flaming net, wrap it around your backside, and you used to dangle it there like a lump of beef. And all the local kids looking through the window taking a mickey. Used to call us banana boys.
Banana boys, yeah, banana boys. You're nothing, you're a banana boy. Oh, dear.
At the age of 7, Mabel and her sister Marjorie were sent to foster parents in Newbury. They went in hope of finding a loving family.
We looked upon this foster mother, really, never having known a mother or father, we looked upon this foster mother in the beginning as our mother. We just took it that she was our mother and that things were going to be all right, but it was very different. We were made to work very, very hard, and the foster mother, she used to hit us a lot, and she had a stick that she used to keep in the corner by the fireplace, and my mind takes me back and I can still see that stick standing there.
As with Muriel Farley, the 2 girls were too frightened to tell the Barnardo's inspector about how they were being treated. It was their Sunday school teacher who eventually discovered what was wrong.
She said, "Where does it hurt?" And I said, "My head." And, she parted my hair. My head was a mass of bruises from this hitting with this stick. And then I did tell her why the bruises were there, because I had been repeatedly hit on the head with a stick. I really can't understand how she could ever take children in like us. I mean, if she wasn't going to be nicer, because we had a lot of friends who were fostered out, and they were in beautiful homes, and we could never understand, why we were treated as we were in ours.
Mabel and Marjorie's ordeal ended when they were returned to the village.
And when we got back to the village, Barkingside, I remember us saying to each other, "Isn't this marvellous? Isn't this wonderful?" And you were almost, sometimes it went through your mind that you never saw the stick anymore. And it was just unbelievable, it really was. And I mean, you may think perhaps I did rather a stupid thing, but I didn't. I was so happy when I got there that when it came, time to go to bed, I went up and kissed the cottage mother good night. I said to Marjorie afterwards, perhaps I shouldn't have done that, but I said, "I don't know how you feel, but it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful here, to think that we're never going to be hit again."
From Thomas Barnardo's time right up until the Second World War, all girls who'd been fostered out were returned to the village at the age of 14 to be trained as domestic servants. Some of the children found this difficult to get used to.
Well, when I arrived back in Barnardo's, I didn't really know where I'd come from, who I belonged to, anything like that. And you're all confused in your mind. I'd never worked, and to suddenly be expected to do it, not knowing how to do it really, that didn't help me any.
Those girls who'd grown up in the village knew the routine and were more accepting of their fate.
For a month you'd be the kitchen helper, you'd be a bedroom cleaner, you'd be a scullery maid, you'd be a scrubber. And I don't mean the type of scrubber you're thinking of. And each individual person, we had our jobs to do, and then our cottage mother would show us how to do it, and we were taught to cook, taught to wash, taught to sew, and everything like that, so that when we went out we were, well, not qualified, but we were able to get on with the work.
Having trained the girls, Barnardo's would place them in service outside the village. Many were unsure what to expect.
Now, I'd never had any idea what service was going to be like, and there was 2 of us went off down to this big house in Surrey, and, well, I think from the moment I got there, I thought, I'm not going to like this. It's not what I want to do, cleaning and everything. And it was a lonely place too. It was right in sort of away from everywhere. And there was just us 2 girls, no other young company, and I hated it there.
We had to stick our jobs for 2 years to get a reference. And after that 2 years, I wrote to Miss Matthews and said I'd like to come back to the village and train to be a nursery maid. So they had me back and they sent me to Baby's Castle in Hawkhurst, Kent. And I trained as a nursery nurse, and then I ended up being an under nanny and then a head nanny. And I'm still a nanny.
For the boys in Barnardo's, there was a greater choice. They could choose between training to be a printer, shoemaker, carpenter, or a sailor. Thomas Barnardo had always dreamed of founding a sea school to train boys for the Navy. Towards the end of his life, he acquired a large disused school in Norfolk and transformed it into a naval training college, or as he liked to call it, a ship on land.
Daily routine started at 6:30 in the morning when the duty bugler sounded the reveille, and then you had 3 minutes to make your bed up, and making your bed meant stripping it, rolling up the mattress, folding up your blankets, folding up your sheets, keeping one blanket and wrapping it round, and then placing your pillow neatly on top of it.
3 minutes.
You had 3 minutes to do that in, and after 3 minutes, the duty bugler used to sound what they called a still. Now that was what they called prayer time, and you had 2 minutes to say your prayers. It acted in two ways. You had to stand still to attention, and while you was doing it, the duty officer and the duty leading hands were going round seeing if anybody hadn't made up the bed, and if they hadn't, you was automatically put on a charge.
300 boys from the age of 9 to 14 lived as though on board a ship. Every morning they scrubbed the decks, prepared their meals in a galley, and underwent physical training. In the afternoon, they had lessons in seamanship. The life was harsh, and to toughen the boys up, shoes were not worn from March to October. The sound of a bugle controlled every aspect of the boys' lives.
Every boy had his own personal bugle call. Now you think about that, 250, 60 boys, and you had to be able to recognise your number by bugle.
The difference between mine and his was 2 notes. Because I was 76, you had this series of calls followed by a little blast, which meant it was 6. Then you had a series of calls again, and 2 small blasts, which represented the 7 or something like that. I know it was like, no, because it was 76, you got 2 small blasts and then 1 small blast, and yours was 3 small blasts. So it was jit, jit, and that was the difference between his and mine.
Two
yeah, one represented the 7 and one represented the 6. That's right. That's your one. Mine was just da at the end. Yeah, but not only that, I mean, it followed after your number was what they called a G. Now, if it was 1G, which long 1G, you used to have to go to the quarterdeck. If it was 2, you had to go to the playground. If it was 3, you had to go to the drill ship. And I mean, the thing was, if you didn't get there, then you was automatically on a charge. I mean, and some of the times, if you didn't hear it properly, you'd go running to the quarterdeck where you should have gone running to the drill hall. So, it was, a bit hard luck on you, mate. That was it. There was no excuse. It just wasn't accepted. You should have heard it.
But even under the showers, the whole thing was done by numbers, because you'd have the warm water come on, and you'd wet yourself down, and then he'd switch it off and he'd say soap. And you'd turn your back, and the bloke behind you used to wash your back, you see. And you'd turn around and you'd wash the other chap's back. Yeah. And he'd say rinse, and on would come the water again, you rinse yourselves down.
And then they turn on the cold.
Weren't allowed to talk. Absolute silence. Any noise, and you
could hear it, even near the soap.
You'd all line up in your numbers from 71 to whatever it was, and then you'd have an inspection chamber. It really was like a chamber. You went into this little sort of cubicle, and the duty officer would be sitting on a form in front of you. Either side there would be 2 big lights. These lights that are set into walls with iron cages on the front, at sort of waist level, and one at the back. And you have to have your towel rolled up with your number showing, and then you'd go in front of the duty officer. You'd stand up there, your arms above your head, holding your towel, legs apart, shout out your number, turn round, and the officer used to check to see you properly washed under the arms and everywhere else. As Frank said, there was no modesty at all.
Of all Thomas Barnardo's innovations, emigration was the most controversial. He implemented it in 1882 with some reluctance, but he was convinced that for children in his care, it offered the best chance of a healthy new life. more than 30,000 children were sent to Canada and later Australia. In 1928, Mabel and Marjorie were put on the list of children to be sent overseas.
I was ill, I couldn't go. And I asked them if they would let Marjorie stay with me until I could go with her. I said, couldn't Marjorie stay with me until I was better? And then when the next lot of girls went out, we could have gone out together. But they wouldn't listen to me. They just said that her name was on the list and she had to go. I was left without her. So, I thought, with having no brothers or sister and never known a mother or father, and then they take away my sister, who was everything to me. We were everything to each other. We just got each other, and that was all. Yeah. And I missed her so much, and I know she did me. And I still, and I think for the rest of my life, I will still wonder why they did it, why they could have been so cruel to have done it, if you like. Yes. Yeah. Because it was cruel, you couldn't say anything else, could you?
Dr. Barnardo's continued the policy of sending children abroad until 1967, long after most other children's charities had ceased to do so.
I have a photograph of Marjorie that was taken just before she boarded the boat to go to Australia. I always kiss her goodnight. Yeah. Because I loved her so much. Yeah.
The girls' village and the naval training schools were isolated from the rest of society. With the outbreak of the Second World War, all that was to change. The homes were evacuated, and the children were fostered out or placed in large country houses. The ties with the past began to loosen. In 1948, the Children's Act declared that the responsibility for the deprived child now lay with the state, and that wherever possible, children should be helped to remain with their families. Thomas Barnardo's idea of the largest family in the world was on its way out. The homes began to close, but the village lived on, and the children who grew up here in the 60s experienced a very different village to the one that Barnardo knew and loved.
I think I came in 66, 67, basically because my mother didn't want to cope.
I came here in 1963. My sister was already here and I think had been here for 11 months. So my mother decided to put me with her because I don't think she could cope.
There was a time when Barnardo's issued clothes and you took it or left it. But I suppose 8, 9, 10-year-old, you'd get to a stage where you say, I'm not wearing that. And there was nothing they could do about it. You were not wearing it. So then, I mean,
you get a clothing allowance after a while and you go shopping.
Yeah,
shopping.
with the staff.
With the staff, yeah.
And they'd have to approve it.
Yeah, and you go, right, well, I'd like that and I'd like that. And then you get to another age and they just give you the money and you go on your own.
And nick what you want and write a receipt and keep the dosh.
No, I don't remember it like that, Miriam, at all.
So.
Despite the closure of the homes, the image of the orphan remains strong, and contributions continue to flow in.
We had, listen, when it comes to style and fashion,
we had style.
Levi jeans, Wrangler, FUS, any company was only too happy to be involved in Dr. Barnardo.
They used to pull up here with lorries out the front, Marks and Spencer.
And each cottage would get marched along and you'd pick
what you wanted and take it.
In 1981, Barnardo's closed their last children's home, and today the only young voices to be heard in the village are those of school children visiting what remains of Thomas Barnardo's dream. For Dave Ryle, the village gardener, the memories are still vivid.
We had a good time, didn't we?
We did, we had a brilliant time. I just remember sneaking down, with all the kids when we used to sneak out at night.
Oh.
And we'd be creeping around here being naughty, and then suddenly there'd be this flashlight. You go, light bulb, leg it! And you go, I'll have you in the morning. But you was all right. You never used to really reprimand too badly, from what I remember.
You haven't changed a bit. You're still as bad.
Not
Terrible when you was here. It was always on the run. We had some good times.
It was village, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was a large property.
Yeah, and it was
village.
big. She was everywhere.
I was, it's true. I was. I got around.
I was on the roofs everywhere. They were terrible at times. But we had some good times, especially at Christmas, didn't we?
Brilliant times at Christmas.
Yeah.
It's slowly it changed. The administration changed, and no more was it long-term children. It was fostering.
Yeah.
And so the whole nature of it changed. And that's really when Barnardo's died, in a way, for a lot of us.
Over 300,000 children have passed through Dr. Barnardo's since it began in 1867. Stepney Causeway, the original boys' home, where these photographs were taken, was demolished in 1970. But the admission reports for almost all the children have survived. Until recently, direct access to these documents was not allowed. But in January of this year, Barnardo's changed their policy, and for the first time, former Barnardo's children are able to see their actual files. In next week's program, we tell the stories of some of the children as they find out about their pasts and discover families they never knew they had.
And next week's programme is at 9:30.